Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the channel RVCCIS.Info, where faculty representatives from Rock Valley College's Computers and Information Systems Department talks to you guys, the students and community at large, about things, roughly speaking, having to do with computers and information systems. Today is another stop on our journey to finding work during a pandemic. We've already talked about in our previous episodes, which will be located as links down below in the description, but we've already talked about things like how to search for work online. We've already done an episode on how to write your resume. We've done episodes on preparing for your interview and dressing for your interview. And today we finally get to the interview itself. In trying to stay consistent here for you so that you're not inundated with too many different kinds of opinions on, what exactly is the right kind of interview skills and tactic that you'll need. Again, today, and again, this is located down below in the description, we are going to use an Indeed list because Stephanie and I are in agreement that that is a pretty good list. Before I forget, howdy everybody, welcome back. With you today is Stephanie Washer and myself, Eric Wolf. Not seen here, Chuck Conkle and Jim Conley, but I'm sure they'll be back someday. So let's just go ahead. Let's get into it. What should we be doing during the interview? Here, let me commandeer this just a little bit by saying we've already covered researching the company beforehand. Please, please, please do not think you know about the company. Do actual research. That's what the internet is for. Beforehand. Also practice your answers. That is absolutely important. Anything that you can do to remove the ambiguity beforehand, anything you can do to feel more comfortable during that interview is absolutely something that you should be doing. So practice actually speaking out the responses to the questions we talked about 2 episodes ago.
Especially if you have a phone interview. Because sometimes phone interviews are a little more uncomfortable because you do not get an immediate response, or you can't even hear their response.
Right.
Since you can't see the facial expression.
And you don't get those visual clues from how things are going. So yeah, that's absolutely right. Those are sketchier.
Yeah. And to tie into our clothing, our interview attire, plan that ahead of time, figure out what you're going to wear and plan it ahead of time. Don't do it like right the morning of, because what if something doesn't fit, things like that. So
right. Great idea.
Yeah,
great idea.
I always have to do that with my husband before a wedding or event, because inevitably he's
I always know where that stuff is, and then the morning of I'm like, shoot, and scrambling for it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
culprit.
Yeah. Your wife's a saint.
Yeah, well, probably. We're husbands all are just children being led around. Maybe that's just there you go. Put that as another tip for her. So let's do this. Let's start with reread the job description.
Yes.
Just because you think you remember what the job posting was about doesn't mean you necessarily will remember exactly what the job posting is about. One of the things we talked about also during the resume writing phase comes back here, which is be sure to use the keywords that the employer is looking for. And the best way to reacclimate yourself to those keywords is to reread them again in the description. So, are they talking about hybrid learning? Are they talking about online? Okay, that's the terminology I should be using here. So reread the job description, because that helps you calibrate your language to be exactly what the interviewers are listening for.
Yeah, because you're going to plan to be there 10 to 15 minutes early anyway, especially in Illinois with all of the construction going on right now. You're inevitably going to get stuck in traffic. But if you arrive 10 to 15 minutes early, that's the perfect time to reread the job description,
Hmm.
kind of look through your resume again, and just to kind of, because I know when I read something right before I go in, that I'm going to use those words most likely. That'll
Right.
be that'll be the thing I remember. So
Absolutely. Get there early. I cannot, that is the most disrespectful thing for the interviewers is when, you saunter in late. That is not your capacity today. You've got to be there even early, 5 to 10 minutes early.
mhm.
That's perfect. You don't want to get there like an hour early or anything. Hope, well, maybe they'll see me early. No, it's not like that. So just 5 or 10 minutes early is fine. Sit in your car, whatever. Um,
And
that
if it's a Zoom meeting, restart your computer that morning, test it
hmm
out, get on. If you can get on earlier, you're probably not going to get on too terribly early, maybe even 5 minutes early. But most of the time, I know we had some Zoom interviews this summer for various jobs, and it was always right on time.
hmm
And the person would just wait in the waiting room
Yeah.
of the Zoom or the Google Meet. So you want to make sure that your mic works and your video works and that your internet is reliable.
hmm Yep. Outstanding. There we go. Off script, but very well done.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. How about this? Be prepared with examples of your work, especially if now that doesn't have to be like physical examples that you're dragging in with you. Like, here's a server farm I set up. You don't necessarily have to do that, but uh, you know, be sure that you're capable of referencing things that you have done. If you are in a graphic design field or any place where you can put examples of your work online, that's a fantastic thing to do too. That would be like an actual tangible physical thing to leave behind. But make sure that you can point to things that you have done that are going to have a positive influence on that employer. Fantastic idea.
Yeah. And generally people bomb interviews because they did not make that connection with the question to their past experience. They would do just a general, this is how I do
Right.
things, and then not tie it back. Well, you've probably done that in the past if you have an answer for it. So
Hmm.
always, like Eric said, make sure you can tie it back to anything on your resume and make sure you
Yeah,
show your
it's actually
experience.
called STAR because everything has to be an acronym. And since
Oh,
this is
right.
RVC and literally everything has to be an acronym, it's STAR. It's when you are answering your questions, you point back to a situation that you were involved in. It's the task. So, what was the core that led you to that situation? The actions that you undertook to either rectify or make better, or whatever the situation, and then the result. So, if um, if you can remember to answer all of your questions in that way, so situation, task, action, result,
Mhm.
essentially it helps you button up all of your answers so that there's no well, there's less room. How's that? There's less room for the interviewer to go, well, but they didn't answer that question.
Right.
If they didn't find a satisfactory conclusion to your answer, it's because they stopped paying attention, pretty much. Oh, it is actually on there. The STAR
So,
method is certainly in the link that you'll find below in the description.
oh, make sure you treat everybody with respect. So when you go into the if you're going in the room or going in the Zoom meeting, you could address everybody. And it was always nice when you started out and thanked everyone for coming, for
Hmm.
inviting them. So
Yeah,
that's just addressing everybody and treating them with respect the entire time.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
always, yeah,
And
and I
like,
always like. Oh, I'm sorry.
no, that's we're doing the respect thing, which is don't butt in when other people are talking, which is too respectful. You have to cut it off at some point. So,
Oh,
that's another polite social interaction, but it's also exactly that, politeness.
Yeah, and it's so hard on Zoom because sometimes you can't really hear everything, and so it's like then you start. There was one meeting I had yesterday that, or the other day, that people were just talking over me. It was because my mic wasn't working, and so
Hmm.
you just want to make sure that you don't, for sure, don't want to talk over anybody unless it's an
Right.
accident.
Bring copies of your resume. That's always an important one. Actually, on my RVC interview, they were short like a copy or two for everybody who was on the panel, so that was convenient just to be able to do there. And I cannot tell you how many interviews I have I have been on myself where I don't have copies of your stuff here. And that's it's really fantastic to be able to do that. I understand it is slaughtering trees at a much higher rate than maybe otherwise we would have needed to, but if you can prove that you are prepared in that way, that always bodes well for how you'll react as an employee later on.
Yep. The other thing is just make sure that, and this kind of goes back to tying your answers uh, to your resume, answer things truthfully. And I
Oh my
mean,
goodness,
that's just
yes.
like, period.
Hmm.
I mean, there shouldn't be anything else to talk about with that, but you never, you just have to, you want to go from your resume and make sure
Hmm.
what you're saying matches your resume or the cover letter that you sent or
Yeah,
the
it's
application.
yeah, that's that the core of that authenticity problem is why very, very probably when you're on an interview, there's going to be more than one person on the other end of that interview. So even if, I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting at like Meg's Coffee, and they're doing an interview in that back room that doesn't really
Yeah.
have walls, but it's in the back there.
Mhm.
And there's almost always more than one interviewer for the interviewee. And the reason for that is you you as the person being interviewed can possibly lie to one person successfully for an hour, but the chances of that are reduced greatly if there's two people you have to lie to successfully for an hour. So that's always been, the more up the chain you go in your career, you're going to find that there's going to be more and more and more people on the other end of that interview because they need to make sure that you are the person, who they're interviewing, as opposed to you successfully lied to them for an hour and now they're stuck with a lunatic because they hired you. So just be authentic. I mean, honestly, they're interviewing you at this point to see if you're a good fit for the company, which means they're trying to match your skills to their needs, but they're also trying to match your your personality to the needs of the group there. So just be yourself, and that's probably, hopefully rather what they're looking for.
Yeah. And I think in the last year I've been on 3 or 4 hiring committees, and it's always been at least 5, if not 6 or 7 people on the
Mm-hmm.
committee. So it's a little daunting when you first get in there, but it works out. I mean, it works out good for us, but I don't know how the the interviewee feels.
Yeah, and like we've tried to mention time and again, is a good interviewer will realize that probably you, the interviewee, is at a disadvantage because everybody else is 100% prepared with exactly how things are going to work, and you can only be prepared a certain percentage, right? Because there's a lot of ambiguity there for you. So a good interviewer will understand that that's what the situation is. um, but you're not always going to get a good interviewer. uh,
Right.
so
Right.
um,
Yeah.
but but at the very least, if you were authentic, if you were you, that means you don't have to have this huge expenditure of energy remembering what lie it was you told to them on your resume, what lie it was you told to them in your interview, so that you can keep that going. Because sooner or later they do find out. It's only happened a couple of times, but I know I've hired people based on experience that they didn't have.
Mm.
And then later on in a casual conversation or whatever, they're like, "Oh, I never worked for them." And you're like, "Oh, but it was on your resume." Stuff like that. That stuff comes back to bite you.
Mhm.
It's more efficient just to be yourself, honestly.
It's so much less to remember then.
Hmm.
All you
Exactly.
do is remember the truth. So,
Oh,
and
wait a minute.
then,
They all think I have a British accent, so I got to
yeah.
remember that's way too much work.
Yeah. And then the other thing is don't, we say it lasts around an hour for an interview, but I was in some higher level like dean hiring committees, and they would last a half hour to 45 minutes. And it was actually nice to have a 15-minute break between the next one. But so the lesson there is keep your questions concise and focus on what they're asking. If you have to write down what they're, maybe it's a two-part question and you have to write it down, please
Right.
write it down. It's
Right.
not going to annoy anybody. It'll help keep you focused. So
Yeah, one of the you'll always see that, and we forgot to mention it, is bring a pen and paper. It's not just to make it look as though you're busy. Those are good tactics to have. Write the questions down, write down everybody's name. That's one of the
yep,
things I always do, is just as people are going around introducing themselves, I'll write their names down on the slide so that later on I can say, "Well, Stephanie," instead of,
yep.
"Well, what's your name?" That works pretty well.
Yeah, I always would do if it was a circle and I was in, so whatever the table looked like, I would just kind of write it in a circle so that I would know
Mm-hmm.
exactly where they're sitting. And
Yep.
I just had my own little method of things. And then the other thing is to keep everything positive. Do not speak negatively about previous employers. You never know who you're talking to in an interview.
Right.
And
Yes.
yeah, yeah. And if you know me, I'm a Pollyanna anyway. I will get pretty sarcastic, but you just want to keep it
Mm-hmm.
light.
I had done 1,000 years ago an interview with a software developer, and they kept asking negative questions. And the interview itself was like 2.5 or 2 hours and 45 minutes long, I think.
Mhm.
And it was talking the whole time and everything. And I know at the very end, they had finally got me to bite on, some negative aspect that I just referenced. I didn't dwell on it, I didn't think. But they were so worried about how I would refer to them after I was gone that was it. That one negative, I knew the guy who was on the hiring committee. So he was like, "Yeah, you goofed up at the end there. You mentioned blank negatively." And that's it. It's 100% kill rate at that.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful with those.
Hmm. Yeah.
So even if you had like an abysmal time, right? At your previous employer, just make sure to focus on the whatever positive aspects you can, because you know if you take that negativity with you to the new employer, they figure that that's just gonna be
Hmm.
something that you transplant here with you.
Yeah, and there's those negative type questions like what is your weakness or
Mm-hmm.
and I there was another one that we asked this summer. I can't remember it now off the top of my head, but it was kind of it could go negative very fast. Like what is your least favorite
Right.
thing or about this job? And so you want to make it just as positive as possible. So you could say like what your weakness is, but make it into a positive.
Mm-hmm.
So you just always keep it on the up and up.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for us in academia, I never thought they would ask me this question. It turns out all of them do. What was your least favorite instructor? And because they want you to, you know, can you demonstrate that you've grown from that, or are you just going to sit here and complain about a bad instructor?
Mhm.
So, um, positivity really does win the day. The whole exercise is you not aggrandizing. That's not right. I'm not here like inflating my accomplishments, but what I am doing is I'm celebrating my accomplishments,
Mhm.
and that's that negativity detracts from that tone.
Yep, does.
After the actual interview part is done, it is always your responsibility to do two things. Number one is, as the interviewee, when you are asked, "Do you have any questions for us?" You must have a question,
Yeah, one,
um,
at least one. If you
at
do not
least
ask
one.
a question, yeah.
Hmm. And they don't all have to be like deadly serious questions. I always ask about coffee, because how else am I supposed to make it through an entire day if not with chemical stimulants, and coffee's my favorite one. So
Yeah.
I always ask about coffee.
Yeah. And
But
the given is you're going to ask about the next steps. So maybe
right.
have the coffee question and next steps. So then you have
Hmm.
two. But
So the next step question for those of you who are not as well versed in interviewing is to ask what the timeline is from the employer for getting an answer back to you on whether or not you made the cut.
Mhm.
So do they owe you do they, what am I'm trying to ask a very negative question here. Do they owe you any damn thing?
No. Mm-mm.
No. And
But you can
here in
ask them when they
2020, I
want,
think they owe you even less.
right. But you can ask them when they're going to make a decision.
Right. Right. Because that way, if they say it's going to be by the end of the week, it gives you a time frame to know, like, okay, it's been a week and a half. I probably didn't make it. Or if they say by the end of next week, that means you have, however long to sweat it out before they ask you again.
Yeah. And depending on what they say, it means you need to get your thank you letter out quick.
A thank you letter. Absolutely. So, how long should you wait to send the thank you letter?
Oh my gosh. Honestly, now everyone's sending it via email and
Email.
they're
Yep.
sending it like right after their interview.
Yep. It's funny, like from the car in the parking lot is probably
Yeah.
a little early, but that's what everybody seems to do.
Yeah.
But actually, the thank you letter is important enough. We do have another episode coming to you on writing just the thank you letter, because if
Mhm.
you can get the 5 steps to the thank you letter nailed, it really goes a long way towards making you an on the cusp candidate to putting
Mhm.
you over into successful candidate.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's a little breadcrumb for our next interview, which is or next episode, which is post interview, the thank you letter. So while you're rooting around for the websites it is that we've been talking about here today, remember that you can get all of those from the description below. While you're down there, be sure to give us a like, to comment. If you have any experiences, good or otherwise, with interviewing, please be sure to do that. We always like to get fresh stories on the hell it is that is interviewing, because it didn't happen to us. So that makes it easier. So while you're down there, leave a comment. Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell so that you can be noticed of any and all content as it comes to you on our regularly scheduled Tuesday, Thursday format here. You can also follow us on our social. We are at RVCCIS.Info on both Twitter and Facebook, and also RVCCIS.Info at anchor.fm. So on behalf of Stephanie Washer, Chuck Conkle, Jim Conley, myself, Eric Wolf, and the rest of the Rock Valley College community, I'm running out of coffee. Stay safe and stay sane out there, everybody.